Hello everyone, welcome back to my C# programming language video series. Before moving to the next chapter, please make sure to subscribe me and like this video. In this video, let's learn about object-oriented programming using C# language. To have more deeper understanding about object-oriented programming, I'll discuss about what are classes, objects, constructions, and the basic principles of object-oriented programming, which are encapsulation, inheritance, polymorphism, and abstraction. First of all, let's take a look on what is object-oriented programming. Simply, object-oriented programming is a programming approach which is based on the concepts of objects. Basically, objects are created as instances of classes which represent real-world entities. Object contains the data and the behaviors of the real-world entity. So, why we use object-oriented programming? When using object-oriented programming concept in our application, there are several advantages we can get from. One can define as modularity, because we can break down our program into small pieces which we can use as classes which are reusable. Reusability is also another advantage of object-oriented programming. As we can create classes for each module, we can reuse them instead of writing the same code several times. Also, with the concept of inheritance and polymorphism, it reduces the number of code lines that we have to write. Scalability also another important feature, which we can modify the existing code or add new features to each classes. With the use of object-oriented programming, we can represent the real-world entities in our code. We can secure our data in our application with object-oriented programming because features of it like access modifiers and encapsulation. Other than this, there are several more advantages with the use of object-oriented programming, and that's why most of the programmers using object-oriented programming concept in their applications. Let's take a look on the classes in object-oriented programming. Classes are the main feature in object-oriented programming. Basically, class is a piece of code which represents the real-world object with its properties and methods. Also, classes acts like a blueprint for creating objects. Let's see a simple example on classes. When we take the real-world object of vehicle, we can represent it as a class. Vehicle is a real-world object. Normally, when we consider a vehicle, it can have several data related to it, which can define as the type of the vehicle, the brand of the vehicle, the color of the vehicle, or number of tires the vehicle have. Other than this data, each vehicle has several functions that we can do using it. The most common function that we can do using a vehicle is drive. So this is how a class can represent a real-world object. So now let's create this class vehicle using C# programming. This is the basic structure of a class. When you are declaring a class, you should mention the access modifier as public, private, or static. Defaultly, a class is public. And next, the keyword class and the name of our class. Inside this class, we can represent our properties and the functions of this vehicle. Here I have defined the properties like type and brand. These properties also should have access modifiers and the type of the data. Defaultly, these properties are private inside the class. If you want, you can declare them as private, protected, or static. This is how we can define a method inside our class. It also have the access modifier and the data type of the return value and the name of the function. Inside this function you can declare the functions that you can do with this. This is the basic concept of a class and how to define a class using C#. Now let's move to the topic object. As I mentioned before, object is an instance of a class. In previous section, we have defined this real-world object vehicle as a class. As object is an instance of a class, we can create an object using this class. As we know, there are several types of vehicle like car, bikes, van, and buses. To represent any of these vehicle types, we can create instance objects. Here I have created an object called object1 with this class vehicle. In our class, it has properties like type, brand, and a method called drive. So in our object called object1, I have assigned a value as car to the type and the brand of the vehicle as Toyota, and I have called the function drive. So this is how we can create objects using a class. Inside your main class, we can create an object for a class. When creating an object, first of all you have to define the name of your class and the name of your object. Here I have defined the name as and then the keyword called new and again called your class. As in this class I have represented the properties type and brand as public. I can assign values to each properties like the object name and its property, and then we can assign a value. Also we can call the function of the class using this object in this way. Now we have a basic idea on how to create a class and object using a class. Now let's take more understanding about classes and objects using a simple application. Now let's create a simple application using classes and objects. As this is our main function, let's create our class called vehicle from outside of this main function. So first define the access modifier and then the keyword called class and the class name and then the class name as vehicle. Then put curly brackets. Inside of the curly brackets of this class, you can define the properties and the methods related to this class vehicle. Let's define our first property with public as the type as the string and the name is type. Let's define another property, public string and the brand. So these are the two properties in our class vehicle, and I am declaring a method inside this function as public void and drive as the name of our function. No parameters and define curly bracket. Inside this function I type the vehicle is driving. So this is our first class, and this class has two properties, name, type and brand, and one function called drive. All these methods and the properties are declared as public. So let's create an object for this class. Define the name of this class and I define the object name as car. Then new again, call the class. So this is our first object that we have created using this class vehicle, and our object name is car. So this object called car also have these properties, and we can assign values for these properties like car dot type equal car and car dot brand equal BMW. Also, we can call the method of this class also as drive. Once we run this application, you can see it prints as the vehicle is driving, which is the content of this method drive. As classes are reusable and we can declare any number of instances for each class. Here I have created one object for this class, and again let's create another object for this as vehicle. The name of our new object is van, and then again declare vehicle. Same as we did here, for this object called van, we can assign values for each property and call the method separately. Now the type of our object van can be defined as van, and the brand value of our object van is Toyota. Again, we can call the function called drive using this object van. Again, run this application and let's see. Here now you can see two logs as we have called this method drive inside this class using these two objects. Let's create another function inside this class as public void and the name as vehicle details. Inside this function we can create log as the vehicle type as type, and let's copy and paste this, and the vehicle brand as brand. Using this object called van, let's call this method as van dot vehicle details, and let's run this application. Here you can see this is the output of our application. The first log is from the object car and the second log is from the object vehicle, and this log is from the vehicle detail method called from the object van. As we have assigned the type of this object van as van and the brand as Toyota, when we are calling the method vehicle details from this object, it prints its value as van and Toyota. So this is how to create a simple class and create objects using it. Another important feature in a class is a constructor. It's a special method in a class which called automatically when an object created for a class. It's same as a function and we can pass parameters to it, or even we can create a constructor without parameters. When we are creating a constructor to a class, we have to define the access modifier and the name of the constructor. The name of the constructor must be same as the name of the class, and this is how a constructor looks like. Constructor don't need a return type as it won't return any values. We can add parameters to these constructors like string type and string brand. Like this we can get parameters through this constructor. Let's define this constructor as type equal type, and the property brand equals the parameter passed through this constructor. Constructor is not like the other methods inside a class. To call a method inside a class, we have to create an object and then call this method like this. But constructors, we don't want to call it separately because when we are creating the object, defaultly we are calling that constructor. To pass parameters to this constructor, you can pass the values through this when you are creating the object. So we can define it as car and then BMW. When you are creating the object called car, you are passing the values to its constructor as car and BMW. This is the constructor of your class, and these parameters will take the values you are passing and then they assign parameter values to the properties inside this class. So we don't need to assign them separately like this. Instead of assigning them separately, you can pass values to their properties using this constructor as parameters. Let's run this application. Here you can see the values have assigned to the variables as we have passed them through constructor parameters. Now let's take a look on the basic principles of object-oriented programming. They are encapsulation, inheritance, polymorphism, and abstraction. So now let's see what are these one by one. Encapsulation. Encapsulation is a principle of object-oriented programming, which is the process of bundling the properties and methods into a single unit and restricting direct access to object components. In the previous example, I have defined the properties of this class as public. If I did not mention the access modifier as public, it will defaultly take as private. When we are defining a property inside a class with the access modifier private, we cannot call them directly through object. Instead of assigning values to them directly, we can assign values to them through a method or a constructor. The basic concept of the encapsulation is keep the private components within the class as outsiders cannot access them through objects. Let's see some examples of this concept. In the class vehicle that we have created, there are two properties called type and brand. I have declared them with the public access modifier. Instead of this public, I can define them as private. So I change the access modifier of properties into private, and then I am trying to access the prop of this class through an object. Car.brand equal BMW, and here you can see it shows an error. That is because these properties are defined as private properties. We cannot access those properties directly through objects. Instead of accessing them directly through this object, we can pass values to them through the constructor and assign those values to these properties. Not only the properties, we can make the methods of a class also private. When we declare a method of a class as private, we cannot access them directly through objects. So in here also it's showing an error. So instead of accessing them directly through the object, I am calling that method inside this public method called drive. Let's run this application and check. Here you can see it prints the vehicle is driving and the vehicle type is car and the brand is BMW, which is from this object. In the object car, I have passed the parameters as car and BMW, and then I call the method drive. So when I pass the parameters to this constructor, it assigns those values to these properties. And when I call this method within itself, it calls the method vehicle details. Here also we can see another set of result as the vehicle is driving and the type as van and Toyota, which is called through this object van. So that's the basic idea of encapsulation, which keeps the properties and the methods of a class private as cannot access by outsiders. The second principle of object-oriented programming is inheritance. The idea of the concept inheritance is it allows the child class to access the properties or methods of the parent class. Here is an example. There is a class called animal. It has a property as name and a function as eat. So, there's another class called dog. With the use of the concept inheritance, we can inherit this parent class animal to this child class dog. This is how we can inherit a parent class to a child class. Once we have inherited a parent class to a child class, we can access the methods and the properties which are accessible through this child class. So let's take a deep look on this through an example. I am removing this whole classes I have created before, and then I am creating a new class called animal. Inside this class, I declare a public property called name. And a method called eat. I write a console write line statement eating, and again I am creating another class called dog. Inside this class, I create another property called color, and another method called behavior. Now I have two classes called animal and dog. Now let's create objects for each of these classes. As animal, the object name is animal1. And now I am assigning a value to the property of the class animal as dog. And also I call the function in this class as eat. Then I create another object for the class dog as dog1 equal and I assign values to the property color of this class dog as and also I'm calling the function equal like this. As you can see, these are two separate classes and we can access only the methods and properties inside each of it. If we try to access this method it through this object dog, you can see it will give an error as there's no function like that inside this class dog. Now let's inherit this class animal to the child class dog. To inherit a class to another class, you have to add a colon and the name of the class that you are inheriting. The class that you are inheriting can be called as the parent class, and the class which you have inherited this class can be called as the child class. And this is the parent class. After you have inherited the class animal to this child class dog, now you can see we can access the method eat which is inside this animal through the object we have created on this class dog. Not only the method, also we can access the properties name through this dog class. Another thing that you should remember when you are inheriting a class to another class is when you are inheriting this class animal to this class dog, you can access only the properties or the methods with the public or protected access modifier through this child class. As the properties and the methods in this class are public, you can call them directly through this child class. But if you have defined this as private, then you can see it shows an error as you cannot access them directly. Assume that you want to make this property as private when you are using this class animal, but also you want to inherit it to this child class. That means you don't want to access the property name through this class, but you want to access it through this child class. In that case, instead of the private, you can use the access modifier called protected. As this property have defined as protected, you can see you cannot access them directly through these classes, but you can access them inside this child class as this. Once we run this application, you can see it print as Shek is eating. Shek is the name that we have given to this property name, and when you are calling this method eat through this object animal one, it prints this line. And then we have created another object to the class dog and have called this behavior function of this dog and the eat function of the parent class, and you can see it have printed as this is how the dog Shek behave. Shek is the name we have inherited from this parent class, and then the method we have called through this dog class which we have inherited from the parent class. So that's the basic concept of inheritance. As I have explained, with the concept of inheritance, you can access a one class through another class. Also, when you are inheriting a class to a child class, we can only access the public or the protected properties and the methods of the parent class through the child class. Let's take a simple look on the access modifier types available in programming. The access modifier type public. When you are using the access modifier public, it means you can access that property or the method through anywhere of the application. If you are defining properties or method with the access modifier protected, that means those can accessible only to the child class. The outsiders cannot access them directly. If you are defining an access modifier as private, it can only be accessible within the class. The outsiders or the inherited classes cannot be accessed it. When using the access modifier default, they are accessible within the same assembly and the derived classes. The third principle of object-oriented programming is polymorphism. In this concept, it allows to use the method with the same name multiple times in classes. Basically, the polymorphism methods can be defined as two ways. One can be defined as method overloading and the other one can be defined as method overriding. Let's take a look on each of these. Method overloading concept. Basically, in a class, we cannot use method with same name several times. But with the concept of this method overloading, you can define several methods with the same name but with different parameters. When taking a look on this example, in your class there are 3 methods with the name method, but each of these methods have different number of parameters. That's the idea of method overloading. Here's another example of method overloading. In this class math operations, you can see there are 2 methods with the name add. Both these methods names are add. But you can see they have different parameters and different return types. So the simple idea of this method overloading is you can use several methods with the same name inside a class but with different parameters. Let's take a deep idea on this. Let's create a class called calculate. This class contains a method called addition. This is the method addition in this class calculate. Now let's copy this class into the same class and here you can see it shows an error as already there is a method with the same name. Now let's change the type of these parameters into double. So now you can see the error has gone because even the names of these functions are same, the parameter types are different. So this is the basic idea of this method overloading, which is a class can contain several methods with the same name but their parameter type should be different. Let's create an object for this as calculate. And let's call these 2 methods. In the first method addition we have 2 integer values, so we have to pass 2 integer parameters, and in the second method there are 2 double parameters, so we have to pass double values. Let's run this application and here you can see it prints the value 3 and 6.4, which is the addition of the parameters that we are passing to these methods. The next polymorphism type is method overriding. In the concept of this method overriding, your child class can implement the same method which is available on the parent class but with different concept. For example, here is a class called animal and a class called dog. This class animal have the method move and you have inherited this animal class to this child class. Also, you want to add the method with the name move to this child class. In that cases, you can use this method overriding concept. You can get more clear idea on this method overriding concept through this example. Here I have mentioned two classes as class animal and the class dog. This class dog have inherited this parent class called animal. In this animal class, there is a method called speak. Even though you want to add another method inside this child class with the same name as speak. In these cases, you can use the keyword override to declare a method with the same name which are already available on the parent class. Assume you have inherited a parent class to a child class. In the concept of inheritance, when you have inherited a parent class to a child class, the child class cannot contain methods with the same name that are available in the parent class. So, to overcome from this situation, the concept overriding was introduced. Let's see another example through a program. Let's create a new class called animal. Inside this class, there is a method as and let's create another class called bird. And inside this class also, let's define a method with the same name as speak and change its content as this is how birds speak. Now you can see in these both classes there's a method with the same name. Now let's inherit the class animal to this child class. Then let's create an object to the class bird as and let's call the function parrot.speak. To override this, we should add the keyword virtual to the parent class method and then override method keyword to this child class. Here you can see it have printed this is how birds speak. So that's the basic idea of method overriding in object-oriented programming. The fourth principle in object-oriented programming is abstract. The basic idea of the concept abstraction is it allows to hide the implementation details of a method and expose only the essential feature of a class. For example, you can define a class as abstract class. But when you are defining a class as an abstract class, all the methods of that class should contain the keyword abstract, and those methods should not contain any method body. That's the concept of the abstract. You can inherit this abstract class to a child class, and through the child class you can access the abstract method and define its body. Here's an example of it. Here I have defined an abstract class called shape. This class contains the keyword as abstract and there's a method called getArea inside this abstract class. That method also defined with the keyword abstract and it has no body inside this class. But you can see I have inherited this class shape to this child class called circle. And through this child class, I have override the method inherited from the class shape, and inside this method, I have defined a body to that class. So far in this video, we have learned the concept of object-oriented programming, most commonly used in programming. So I hope now you all have a clear idea of the concept in object-oriented programming, as what is a class, what is an object, what is a constructor, and the basic principles of object-oriented programming. Here's a reminder to subscribe me and like this video, and let's meet again in the next chapter.